I have a tradition. Every year, without fail, I make a pilgrimage to the wilds of Maine for the hunting season. Instead of buying a cabin, which would be a luxury I can't afford for just one weekend a year, I opt for an Airbnb tucked away in the secluded woods. I'm no expert hunter, still learning the ropes, and in recent years, I've had to go alone as my uncle's health deteriorated, leaving him unable to accompany me. Last year, in 2022, was no exception. I had just finished work and, with haste, packed my bags, ready for my journey to Maine. The Airbnb I'd rented was situated near a national park, and I arrived late on a Friday night. The sky was a pitch-black canvas, devoid of the usual sounds of nature. November nights in Maine are eerily silent, especially when you're in a remote location like the one I'd chosen. I parked my car as close as possible to the cabin. The owner had informed me that the key would be hidden under the welcome mat, and there it was, waiting for me. I lugged my bags inside, and the owner had been considerate enough to have the heat cranked up. It was a cozy cabin, perfect for the cold Maine November. The Airbnb came with cable and Wi-Fi, so I set an alarm, planning to hit the woods at the crack of dawn. That's the best time to catch a deer or maybe even spot a moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I awoke as my alarm blared, and within half an hour, I was trudging through the unfamiliar terrain. I settled behind a blowdown, a spot that looked promising. But then, something happened that sent shivers down my spine. A voice, a man's voice, called out from behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, to find a man with graying hair, who looked deceptively youthful for his age, approaching me slowly. His voice was filled with anger as he asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" I stammered in response, "Excuse me?" He continued, his tone menacing, "Hunting is restricted here. I saw you come up here. You'd best leave the way you came." His words sent a chill down my spine. "I didn't know," I muttered, realizing I'd inadvertently trespassed. I quickly gathered my gear and began retracing my steps, but when I glanced back, the man had vanished into thin air. I returned to the cabin, disheartened but determined. As I approached, I noticed something unsettling. The door was unlocked. I could have sworn I'd locked it before leaving. As I stepped inside, a feeling of unease crept over me. Things seemed to have been moved, and the zipper on my bag was unzipped. My instincts told me something wasn't right, though I couldn't recall whether I'd left it open or closed. After a quick check of the rooms, I decided to head into town for a meal and regroup. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Upon my return to the cabin, I devoured some Chinese takeout, planning to head back out to the park at dusk. I had just settled down for a nap when I heard it, the distinct click of a door opening. Startled, I awoke, realizing that the closet door in the bedroom was now slightly ajar. Panic coursed through me. I waited, heart pounding, before mustering the courage to investigate. Clutching my CZ-75, I tiptoed back into the bedroom and flicked on the light. My gun trained on the closet, I barked, "Come out now, or I'll shoot." The closet door creaked open, and to my horror, the same man from earlier emerged, sporting a grotesque grin with a missing front tooth. "You got me," he chortled. My trembling fingers fumbled for my phone, and I dialed 911. The local sheriff's deputies were on their way, and I informed them of the intruder while keeping my firearm trained on him. It felt like an eternity until the deputies arrived. The man continued to mutter about people like me having no respect for the area, his words making no sense. When they finally apprehended him, he claimed the door had been unlocked, but I knew better. Later, the Airbnb host confirmed that there were no hidden keys and that the door had indeed been locked. Still, the host seemed more concerned about their belongings than my well-being, showing no remorse for the terrifying experience. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what his true intentions were. One thing's for sure, I'm grateful that I was on a hunting trip and had my firearm with me, ready to neutralize the threat that lurked in the shadows of the Maine wilderness. I was only 14 years old when this harrowing incident unfolded. It marked my very first year hunting deer alongside my family, specifically my father, my cousin, and myself. Our hunting grounds were nestled in the rugged wilderness of northern Michigan, a place where the unforgiving winters meant darkness descended early, casting an eerie shroud over the land. To give you an idea of the vastness of our hunting area, my blind was situated 2 miles south of my father's, while his stand lay 9 miles southwest from our camp. We traveled on a four-wheeler for about 100 yards, leaving me with quite a hike before reaching my designated spot. It was around 4 p.m. when the chill began to creep in, and I decided to close up my hunting tent. My weapon of choice was a .243 rifle adorned with a pink camo cover and a strap for easy carrying. After securing my tent's zippers and stowing my garbage away in a bucket, I heard a faint rustling of leaves nearby. I instinctively turned my head to scan for any sign of deer, but after a minute or so, I dismissed it as the work of a squirrel or a bird. Disheartened, I closed up my blind and started the trek back to my father's location. However, as I took my first steps out of the blind, something caught my eye, a fresh trail carved through the leaves. It was a wide path, too wide for a small animal or even a deer. A sense of dread began to wash over me as I considered the possibility of encountering a bear or a wolf. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace toward my father's stand, but darkness was falling rapidly, and I was still roughly a mile away. Panic set in when, out of nowhere, I was abruptly halted by a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was a horrifying, guttural noise, something between a bear's growl and a man being brutally murdered. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I broke into a sprint, my boots and heavy hunting gear weighing me down. I had roughly 20 pounds of equipment strapped to my back, but fear propelled me forward, and I didn't dare look back. Around 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard it again, even louder and closer this time. It was as if the night itself was conspiring against me. With only the dim moonlight to guide me, I turned on my headlamp, and what I saw froze my blood. Approximately 50 yards away, illuminated by the moonlight, stood a tall, thin figure. It was easily 10 feet in height, with long, spindly limbs that sent a shiver down my spine. Without a second thought, I continued running, all the while struggling to retrieve my rifle from my back. I had no idea where I was running, but I couldn't risk stopping. Eventually, I found myself on Rabbit Road, a familiar route that connected my camp to the hunting area. I sprinted along the road until my camp came into view. Exhausted and terrified, I climbed the cabin steps, but as I reached the porch, I vomited from sheer exhaustion, retching for what felt like an eternity. Moments later, I passed out. My father arrived on his four-wheeler, pulling into the cabin driveway. When I awoke, I rushed to him, tears streaming down my face, and recounted the horrifying ordeal I had just experienced. At first, he didn't believe me, dismissing it as a product of my imagination. However, as he saw the sheer desperation in my eyes, his expression changed, and he began to grasp the gravity of the situation. I didn't sleep that night, and the memory of that nightmarish encounter haunted me for weeks. People tried to convince me that it was probably just a bear, or that my young imagination had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. As I've grown older, I've only ventured into the wilderness to hunt with someone by my side, armed with a more powerful firearm. The reassurance that I can protect myself against whatever lurked in the dark has become my lifeline. This experience remains etched in my memory as the most terrifying ordeal of my life, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the wilderness conceals far more than we can ever fathom. I was just 13 years old, full of excitement as I returned home from school. Hunting season was upon us, and I couldn't wait to head to our beloved ranch in Alice, Texas. This place held countless cherished memories for me, as I had been going there since I was just 4 years old. It was a family affair, with my grandpa, dad, and me at the heart of it all. Along with us, there would be a few other folks, mainly the ranch owner's family. The ranch spanned a vast 300 acres, and the campsite was a quaint little shack, just about the size of a regular bedroom. Although there was electricity, it wasn't a spacious cabin like those you might imagine. After all, we were hunters, not luxury seekers. However, one eerie discovery had forever changed our sleeping arrangements. My dad had once found a massive snake shed in one of the cabin's beds when I was little, and from that day on, we opted for the security of a tent. The camp was enveloped by woods, with a small field stretching out ahead, roughly the size of a football field. This was where we would set up for dove hunting. But on this particular Friday evening, darkness was falling rapidly as we arrived at the ranch. It was already 10 p.m., and the inky night concealed the familiar surroundings that held a special place in my heart. We unloaded our gear, chatted around the campfire, shared jokes, and reveled in the anticipation of the hunt. Then, it happened. A spine-tingling scream pierced the night, shattering the peaceful atmosphere we had been enjoying. It was a sound I can hardly put into words, like a grotesque hybrid of a human and something far more sinister. The scream didn't come from too far away, in fact, it was uncomfortably close. We all leaped from our seats, and I could see the fear in the eyes of the grown men around me, a chilling contrast to their typically stoic demeanor. The ranch owner, a man in his 70s, was the first to voice what was on everyone's minds. What the heck was that? With a sense of duty, he ordered me and one of his family members to investigate. So, we hopped onto my grandpa's ATV and set out to explore the dark surroundings, our flashlights cutting through the obscurity. We scoured the perimeter, but to our bewilderment, we found nothing. The eerie quietude hung in the air like a sinister omen. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread as I returned to the camp. Even the thought of being alone in the dark left me quaking with fear. As every seasoned hunter knows, the pre-dawn hours are crucial for remaining unseen by the deer. I was assigned to the hunting blind by my grandpa, and as dawn's first light began to break, I found myself navigating the ladder to my position. The blind was my sanctuary, a place where I could wait for the perfect shot. But my sense of unease remained. The night's horrifying scream echoed in my mind, and I couldn't rid myself of the dread it had instilled. I sat in the blind, scanning the surroundings, my finger twitching nervously on the trigger of my .22 rifle, the only companion I had in the darkness. Time ticked by, and it remained dark outside. I couldn't wait for the sun to break over the horizon. However, the stillness of the night was broken when my night vision sight detected movement in the middle of the trail below. I couldn't see well in the darkness, so I eagerly peered through the night vision scope, anticipating a deer. But what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I was expecting to see a deer. Instead, I saw a figure that chilled me to the core. It appeared distorted in the night vision, but it bore the silhouette of a person. I couldn't make out its face, but it was unmistakably a human-like shape. That's when it turned and locked its gaze onto me, as if it knew I was watching. And then, it happened again. That same blood-curdling scream, even louder than before, shattered the silence. Fear overtook me completely, and I instinctively reached for my .22 and began firing. I emptied the entire clip into the path where the figure stood. In those heart-pounding moments, I stared through the night vision scope once more, but the figure had vanished. I was still trembling with fear, and my hands fumbled as I grabbed my larger rifle, a .243. I fired off all 4 rounds into the same path, desperate to keep whatever it was at bay. When the first rays of dawn finally began to break, I gathered my wits and cautiously left the blind. I went to inspect the area where the figure had been, but there was no sign of blood or any indication that my shots had hit their mark. Even more bewildering, there were no footprints to be found, as if the creature had never been there. Soon, my phone started buzzing incessantly with texts and calls. It was my dad, and he had heard the scream, too. My grandpa had heard it as well. We were all shaken by the unearthly sound. Despite the sheer terror of that night, we still returned to the ranch to hunt. But it's never been the same peaceful haven it once was. Nowadays, I refuse to go alone into the dark, haunted by the fear that the enigmatic figure might return. I may never know what that entity was, but one thing's for certain, it withstood 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 rounds from a .243. To this day, I shudder at the thought of what I encountered in the darkness of that Texas ranch.